Sorry, I have been gone for so long. I was struggling finding guests there for a while and was thinking about making podcasts again. And so the last few months I've been rebranding and thinking of a new type of show. Um, it's going to look a little different. It's going to be with me and my brother-in-law, Robert Seiler. Where essentially we'll meet up once a week on this video call, and I'll think of a question. I just kind of bring it up. We'll talk about it, see where the conversation goes. Um, and if you would like a question answered or us to talk about a question, go ahead. Feel free to DM me on Instagram or Facebook at the Walk of Life Podcast, or email me at the Walk of Life Podcast at gmail.com. Update on my life. I've graduated college, got my degree in middle school education. Right after that, I went to Alaska and got a job in Creston, Washington, teaching junior high math, grades 6 through 8. Started doing that, coached junior high football, and now I'm coaching junior high girls basketball. So super busy, but it's been great, and excited to start doing this again. So this is what's going to look like moving forward. Peace out. Here we go. Starting the new show. I'm going to make you big. Here we go. Okay, this is Robert Seiler, or everyone knows him as Bobby Seiler. He's my brother-in-law, and we're going to have a whole new type of show like I introduced earlier. But essentially, each week we'll meet, and I'll pose a question, and we'll kind of just discuss the topic and see where we go from there. Today, I'm going to give a little background on Bobby so that you guys can trust him, and then we'll end with a good question. All right?
Potentially.
So, potentially, yeah. I mean, you can't really trust anybody in today's world, but, you know.
Right. Trust but verify.
Right. So where'd you grow up, Bobby?
Good old Pacific County, Washington, a little town called Raymond or Menlo, same kind of area, really. I was born there. I lived there up until the age of roughly 10 or 11, and then I moved up to the larger city, a little bit away from the coast, is the Yelm Rainier area, where I graduated from Rainier High School in 2008.
And where your time split between you and your dad? Your mom and your dad?
Yeah, after that was the reason for moving. My parents got divorced right around the age of 9 or 10. So shortly after that, we moved to the Yelm area where my mom's mom lived at. So we just went up there.
Gotcha. All right. So after high school, what it look like?
After high school, I moved back to the Raymond area, and I worked for my dad for several years. I did basic accounting, basic tax preparation, and basic IT network maintenance, that kind of stuff for his CPA firm that he has, one in Long Beach, a branch in Long Beach and a branch in South Bend. So I just kind of got my feet wet doing that kind of stuff.
Pretty much out of high school, you didn't know what you wanted to do, so you just gonna try that, or what?
That is a very good way to put it. I was always a jack of all trades, master of none. So I was just anything and everything. ADD at its finest.
Right. I'm trying to envision you working in an office right now. It's not working.
Well, it worked so well I joined the military. Does that answer it?
What age did you join the military?
Well, it would have been I turned 21 in tech school, so I would have started basic and stuff at 20.
So you worked for your dad for like a year and a half, probably.
Yeah, roughly in
And
between
you're
high
like going to
school and there.
school at the same time.
Yeah, I was. I was working quite a few hours for him, and I was also taking a full course load at Grays Harbor College towards my AA in accounting.
Gotcha. What'd you learn from the military?
Boy, howdy, what didn't I learn from the military?
That's kind of a
Um,
loaded question, but
I learned a lot of good and a lot of bad. But I mean, I tell everybody the greatest days of my military career was the day got in and the day I got out, because I loved being in the military. I met a ton of great people, learned a ton of great skills, learned a lot about who I was, and I did a lot of growing up in there. But I also, being a part of the federal government, was able to see how much I needed to be in the private sector, where I can focus on things like efficiency and getting things done quickly, if
at,
that
at
makes
what
sense.
point at what point did you realize that though? Like, was there like, oh my gosh, like these people suck. Like, get the orders down the hill so we can get going on the type, and then you're just like, oh yeah, that's not it.
Well, I mean, for the most part, I really enjoyed everyone I worked with, but I just I experienced a frustration, at the difference between my priority to always get the mission done and some people's priorities being to just rank up and have a nice cushy career. I've always been a get things done person, and there's a lot of opportunity in large organizations, the federal government specifically, for people to find cracks and crevices to latch onto and never grow or get anything done and just kind of be a leech on the system. And so just viewing things like that. And I also saw a lot of things that, I mean, they gave us trainings and stuff to always be on the lookout for things like fraud, waste, and abuse. Um, and that's pretty much just everywhere you look in the government. So it just having your eyes open, you can't see somebody's time being wasted or some taxpayer dollars being wasted.
The training was on fraud. What does that mean? Like, how to not
Well,
waste somebody else's money?
well, essentially, it's just one of a long list of, they call them CBTs, computer based training programs, that you just have to take all these online classes about. And it's, it'll be any subject matter from sexual harassment to um, fraud, waste, and abuse to safety when backing up a vehicle, like, any generic concept that they're trying to teach tons of people in a simple way. Um, and one of them I remember when we first joined was all about fraud, waste, and abuse. And there was a lot of situations in the military where, whatever you want to call it, from a liability perspective, they would give you, directives of saying something like, for example, don't ever back up a vehicle out of a building without two spotters, which is practical and it makes sense. But then manning issues arise or whatever the case may be, and the mission always dictates that you just have to go out there by yourself and pull the vehicle out of the building. So it's
Yeah,
you're going to go out
yeah.
there and you're going to get in trouble if you get caught, but you're also going to get in trouble if you don't accomplish what you're supposed to accomplish. So it's kind of a one of
You're
those
faced with a
situations.
dilemma from the very beginning.
Correct.
Did On those courses, did you ever feel any political push either one way or the other, or were they pretty neutral?
Honestly, no. I mean, number one, it was a long time ago, but number two, no. I feel like it was always pretty just straightforward. And I even remember, like, they're very similar to things from like working at Home Depot or wherever. Any large corporation that's gonna try and train a lot of people on something is just gonna use these um, simple computer classes that are like 20 minutes long to do it. But when I first got in, I definitely didn't feel any of the political stuff that I feel going on in the world today. Towards the end of my time in, I really did notice what I saw was like a change in the caliber of people that I was coming across. Because I started off just driving, And then I was a dispatcher for a while. So I would drive buses and trucks for the first couple years. And then I would dispatch buses and trucks for the next couple years. And then the last 2 years, year or two I was in, I would train people how to drive buses and trucks. And from the start of my training career, it was like I just started to see people coming in who, I mean, I wouldn't trust them to mow my yard, let alone go to war with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, most definitely does. Um, what do you think the shift was? I mean, you were in there for what, 6 years, 5 years,
Yep.
6 years? I mean, how was it, like a subtle trend, or was it like, how big of a swing? I mean, obviously, it had to be pretty large if you're going to notice it, first of all. But
Yeah. And I mean, and it could have been my perspective shifting as I went from being somebody who was responsible to somebody else versus towards the end where now I'm responsible for other people. Maybe I started to open my eyes a little more at that point, but I who knows? I mean, I also the military and sometimes the way they have to set up systems to be redundant or whatever they have to do. I mean, you're sending somebody who's never driven a vehicle before, like they didn't have their license until they went to join the military, and then you send that person for some reason to Alaska and try to teach them how to drive semi trucks. Like it.
in the middle of dead winter.
Yeah, and it just seems like, well, obviously, if we sat down and thought that through, maybe that person could have been more useful in a different career field or somewhere else. But just the way everything is always set up to be automated and filed all automatically, basically, it just kind of things can be done pretty inefficiently.
Yeah, and everything's. I mean, especially now, everything's the personal. Like looking through somebody's file is it's going out the window for sure because with AI and
Oh
the
yeah,
computer can do everything better.
right.
Um, but then okay, but after the military, what do we move into?
After the military, we went into. Well, I did drive trucks in Anchorage there for a little bit in just for a private company up there. They were I would deliver like feed and grain and stuff like that to farms out in Alaska and go. I would take like a grain truck out and fill up their grain bins or haul pallets of stuff to the different stores around there. Basically, it was mostly garden supplies and animal feed, that kind of stuff. I did that probably about 6 months until I got my real estate license and then started into real estate.
Did you guys had bought a that fourplex before then, correct?
Yeah, that was the main motivation in shifting from uh, operating vehicles in essentially was my career into real estate. Was that when I was deployed, um, I did a lot of research on how to build wealth and achieve financial freedom when I got out because I'd known at that point I didn't want to make a career out of it. Um, so I had already kind of started planning, and when I returned from that deployment, uh, Mel and I bought our first piece of real estate up there. It was a fourplex, so it was 4 apartment units in one building. And that was a life changing event for us, good and bad. We learned a lot, good and bad. We grew up a lot just from doing it because there's a lot of responsibility. But it kind of, since we purchased that while I was in the military, it kind of steered our decision afterwards. I mean, number one, we saw how much our realtor made when they sold us the building, and that was like an eye opener as a young kid. You're like, oh, geez, that's possible to make that much money. And you're like, obviously you realize later on that's a gross amount and they have to pay taxes and their brokerage and all that kind of stuff. But, real life kicks in. But when you're that young, all you think is that's the greatest thing in the world. But also the other half of that coin was that the fourplex really changed our life and our our mindset in like what was possible. I mean, we were able to live in one unit, rent out the other three, and more than cover the cost of the building. But also during the summer, since Alaska is a really large tourist destination, I mean, we would go as far as an extreme as to take our camper in our driveway and stay out there and then rent out the unit that we lived in to try and maximize as much profit from the building as we could. And it really opened my eyes to the fact that once you own certain kinds of real estate, there is no limit to what you can do with it. It's just you. You are the only limit.
Right, like how much you're willing to sacrifice. Um,
Yep.
with a young person, early on in their career stage, which is let's just make a scenario out of this. Hypothetically, if someone was just starting working, maybe been saving up some cash, so they got 20 grand, stowed away or something. And they're like, this real estate sounds like a good idea. Just as an investment standpoint, where would you enter in today's world?
Well, I mean, it boils down to personal preference, risk tolerance, those kinds of things, and also what you're comfortable with. A lot of people don't have the confidence or the ability to swing a hammer to hang a picture, so it really kind of depends on how comfortable you are maintaining buildings and that kind of stuff. And I was very fortunate from a young age. My dad had owned buildings and businesses, and I remember, geez, back at 8 to 10 years old, just painting fences and doing any kind of building maintenance that I was lucky enough that he was willing to watch me screw up everything and let me learn on his stuff. So that was a great opportunity for me growing up, and it made me comfortable just digging in and learning and how to fix buildings. So for me personally, being a little more on the comfortable and in the construction side of things, I prefer multifamily. I like 4 units or less because after 4 units, you get into commercial territory, and the funding and the financing that is available for 5 unit and larger buildings is much more limited, and it requires much more cash up front usually to get into. But 4 units or less can still be purchased with things like a FHA loan, VA loan, those kinds of things. So it's still a semi-liquid asset in my mind. Obviously not as liquid as a single family home. If you're going to be in real estate, that's always going to be the one you can move the quickest because there's the most purchasers or buyers out there available for it. But I think that multifamily 4 units or less is a very good mixture of the two. You take lots of units under one roof and you have huge economies of scale that help you in ways like the more tenants you have in one building, then the more tenants there are paying for that roof or that boiler system or
Right.
whatever repairs come up. And then let's say you have 4 tenants in one building and one person moves out. Okay, well, then you only lose 25% of that building's income. And you're a little less of a lurch than if you have a single family home that has a mortgage on it and one person moves out. Well, there goes all of the income until you refill it. So there's differences like that cause me personally to lean towards multifamily.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, moving forward with real estate, you started under a company or agency, correct?
Yeah, we Mel and I both when got into real estate. She started first. She started working for somebody up in Alaska as kind of just a assistant, helping them, learning the ropes, doing all that kind of stuff, while I was still driving trucks. And then when we decided to go out on our own, we both started at Keller Williams, and it was the largest brokerage in the world by agent count at that point in time, which is the main reason we chose it. And so we dove headfirst into a sales career, not having a clue what we were doing or whether we were going to make it or not. It just kind of seemed like what we were supposed to do because we knew that the investing side is what we wanted to pursue, and the only thing that made sense to pursue real estate investing was to have access to capital from being able to close a lot of sales. And then also having access to deals and knowing how to analyze the market and that kind of stuff, it just kind of made sense that being a high producing real estate agent lends itself to being a big time real estate investor.
Did you have any like career dreams or goals at this point, or was it just like we want financial freedom for us two personally and our family moving forward, or where was the motive at?
Yeah, the motive quickly shifted from we want financial freedom to astronomically tall goals. I mean, I remember us sitting down when we were both like really brand new in it, and we were just kind of we would go to any classes or courses we could get that were going on. We would learn anything and everything we could. We would sit down and we would dream board. We would make our visions of what the future would look like, and they always were some of the loftiest aspirations you can imagine. I mean, when we first started, we wanted to have a title company and a financing company and the real estate sales company and our investment side. And there was no end really to, the amount of businesses that we wanted to own back then.
How has that changed over the last 10 years?
Well, growing successful companies changes you a lot as a person, that's for sure. And then also, I mean, life events happen. You get older, you start to realize you're not as invincible as you once were. And you start to realize that, you have this chunk of time on this earth. And while you can be pursuing financial success head first, you usually have to forsake other things in that pursuit if you want to do it at the speed that we did it at. And it just having to sacrifice things like that kind of, the old saying, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Well, you spend a few years building a company and you start to realize all the things that you're missing out on, like nieces and nephews' birthdays and that kind of stuff. And your perspective in life changes as you get older, and you go through events like we just had our first child, and that, really changes your priorities. So it's just kind of shifted over time for us.
Starting with that beginning, I'm thinking about the beginning grind stages. Because somewhere along the line when you started your business, and you started in Alaska, right?
Yep.
And then how long were you doing it before you moved back to Washington?
Oh boy, that wasn't super long. Maybe a year, roughly, something like that we were working on it up there. And we didn't sell a ton of houses. We sold a few. I had, some buddies in the military that were PCSing, and so we would help them sell their condos or their houses, that kind of stuff. Um, but our real estate career didn't really take off until we moved back to Washington.
Okay. Well, was there a market shift at some point and the opportunity was just there, or what? What did you see that allowed you to just take off in those quick 3 or 4 years?
That's a really good question. There was a lot of different factors coalescing into that hockey puck or that hockey stick line that we achieved. And number one is any business that you start or anything that you pursue, you have to kind of beat your head against the wall for a while. Number one, before you're good at it, and number two, before you start to actually gain some traction. So you could basically say the whole first year that we were in it up there, I mean, we were essentially figuring out how to do lead generation, which is the number one thing for any business to be successful. And so we spent all of that time doing that lead gen up there. I mean, that looked like both of us on the computer all day long trying to figure out social media, because we were, that was a new part of the business landscape back then. Trying to figure out, Mel did most of that back then. And it was me trying to knock on doors in neighborhoods and dial in my scripts. And I mean, I remember sitting down in one of our empty apartments, just making phone calls to, you could buy these lists of phone numbers in the area. And so it was really just us scratching and kicking and clawing at anything and everything we could find until you start to find what works for you. And then, by the time we did that, we had started to move down to Washington. So we were pretty seasoned at finding business by the time we moved back. And then there was also the combination of that and us moving very quickly in a very concentrated market. We were in a very small real estate market compared to Anchorage, Alaska, which was several 100,000 people. And then we moved back to Pacific County, Washington, the Raymond side specifically, where there was only a couple of whatever you want to call them, old school agents. I mean, they'd been doing it for a long time. They'd been through many market cycles and they had seen it all. So take that as you will. They were in their ways, regardless of what we were going to do. So we kind of just came in real fast and changed everything up on them. And we were able to garner a huge market share, in proportion to how new we were.
So essentially, the hard work and discipline mixed with opportunity.
That is 100%. That's a
And
good way to put it.
did, did you guys foresee that coming once you moved, or was that like? Because I mean, were you guys moving either way, or was it like, okay, here's this beautiful business opportunity here? Should we just head back to our family and jump on it, or is it like I'm going no matter what, whether the business is there or not?
We were going to move regardless, and you were a big factor in that decision. I remember specifically the day your sister said, "I don't want to miss any more of Logan's basketball games," and it was pretty much from that day forward. We said, "Okay, we're gonna get back down there," and we just started. Even while we lived up there, we would be figuring out how we were going to structure our business down here, what we were going to do, what markets we were going to target. And it took a little bit of dialing in once we got down here too. I mean, we lived with my mom for a little bit up in the Rainier area while we were looking for places, and we kind of did a little real estate up there at first. But then we moved back to the Pacific County area because we did see the opportunity there. We bought a place there and we realized that the level of service people were receiving had room for drastic improvement. And we saw that as our opportunity. That was going to be our leverage into the market. All we had to do was get a couple sales under our belt and provide phenomenal service. And that's what we did. And that's all it kind of took off like fire after that.
Absolutely. Okay, so then you went through your grind phase in Washington, right? Where it was like nose of the grindstone for what? How long? How long? When you? I mean, you just started scaling back, right?
Yeah, we just kind of within the last year or two tried to begin prioritizing family and things like that, so that we could make sure that we had time to do the things that are important to us. But it was a concentrated several years where, I mean, Mel was constantly working on the phone and the computer, and I was on the road basically from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. 7 days a week. And that happened for probably almost 2 years, but it was really concentrated like that for a solid year. And that was the time frame leading up to COVID and during COVID when the real estate market was
Which,
really crazy.
I mean, I'm just thinking about like with the teaching and coaching that I've been doing. Man, this few months has felt like a low, right?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to imagine, a 14 or 20 or 16 hour, however long it is, um, without an intermission for, a year or two on end. That's going to most certainly take a toll on
It's
the
definitely
stress
not
levels in your
healthy.
body. Yeah, right. I mean, I can just imagine how many energy drinks were drinking that day
Yeah,
in that time
exactly.
period.
Yep.
I know I mooched a few off of you. Uh, so, I mean, this is most definitely a Christian podcast. So, when did Christ enter into the conversation?
For me personally, it started as a young kid. I grew up in the church. I went to a private Christian school when I was young, right behind Gailey's. And so I knew the Lord from a young age. I spent the majority of my double digit years up until my early 30s, like so from probably 12 to 30ish, just kind of ignoring it. I mean, if I look back on it, right, I would probably tell people I was agnostic back then. It's not that I didn't believe in God, it's just that I was kind of doing my own thing, whatever you want to call it. um
Living
it
this
wasn't
in
until
this vicious cycle of just going through life, like trying to do whatever's best for you and your family without even taking into account of what's going on in this spirit realm that's around us, that
100%.
everyone,
Yep.
that nobody really wants to talk about, but that's clearly everyone can feel it, sort of.
100%. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Prioritizing earthly things and my own flesh and desires and that all that. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
And it was
um,
recently, I mean, we all kind of roughly around the same time, me, you, and Mel. We all found the
yeah,
Lord.
which
And
is yeah. I mean, we got to tell that story. So I don't, we never talked about it before you guys came out, did we?
I don't think so.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it might have been early November 2 years ago that I met a guy who was talking about God, and all of a sudden here I am, Christian, trying to read the Bible, and I was 100% agnostic. I was actually leaning on the side of atheist. I was like, I didn't believe in like that. I was just kind of like, it's not really there, that's kind of, you just die and that's it. But then I kind of started seeing the world in a different light and changed my perspective. And then you guys come out, and I mean, I'll never forget that night in that Airbnb
The
when
red door in.
the red door, exactly. And it was like, hey, I found God, and they're like, hey, I found God. Oh
Yeah.
man, and emotions were flying, and there's, yeah,
It was definitely
it's
God's
it's
timing
it's
for sure.
crazy to me. Oh, yeah, for sure. But it's crazy to me how kind of our journeys have been so aligned since then. Like, once I hopped on it and you guys hopped on it, I mean, we have grown so much. Like, I think about 2 years ago, me, the guy that was trying to figure out what this whole Christianity thing is. It's
Yeah.
like I can't even describe who that person was.
Yeah, you don't know him no more, do you?
No. No, I can't even think about life when I was agnostic. I can't even imagine like where my mind was, or more of what was I ignoring, I
Yeah.
guess. Um,
Yeah. I
but
know
yeah,
the feeling. It's hard to picture living life again that way. I can't really comprehend it anymore.
yeah, and I try, especially with talking to people, and you can see like the where they're living. It's not Christ is not at the forefront, or at least not like a priority. You can kind of tell they're in that mindset of, I don't know what I believe, but I'm living my life, right? I'm gonna do my thing.
Yep.
And it's hard for me to see that perspective anymore. Now that I've been out of it for 2 years, but I try. It's like, you're never gonna be perfect, never even gonna be close. So,
Right.
um, being understanding of others in that sense, but it's getting harder and harder, um, which is a struggle at times.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, there's two sides to every coin too. I mean, there's if something's getting further away, it means you're getting closer to something else.
Yeah. And it's like you never really understand what those random Instagram posts are about cutting out people in your life until you actually have to do it. And that's like, yeah, well, our goals of life are just not aligned anymore, and people just kind of fade away.
That's a tough pill to swallow in any pursuit. But to usually, in my experience, to pursue anything at a high level, it requires some of that. You'll usually be able to audit your time and the people that you spend it with. And if you're very blunt with yourself, you can find certain people that are moving you towards objectives and certain people that are keeping you from reaching them or slowing you down or,
What let's just I mean, we're kind of caught up into your life now, but what would you say your top objectives are for your life at the moment?
boy, howdy. That is a that's a good question and a tough one. But I mean,
Because you're going through some changes in life that
yeah,
are amazing. So
yeah, we just had our first kid. It's a little girl. She was 9 pounds 1 ounces, 21 inches long, and I can't tell you the number of people who told me that life was going to be different from there on out. It's I mean, it was all positive. Everybody says it's the greatest thing ever, and it is. But it's just like I understand why nobody gave me any specifics because you can't. It's not something that's explainable. It definitely increases your heart's capacity for love, and that's a very spiritual thing as well because it kind of gives you a glimpse into a father's love.
right,
We always, especially men, we struggle a lot with accepting God's grace and forgiveness as is because we're born and we're raised and we've got all these grooves in our brain, neural pathways that tell us that we got to be tough or fast or strong or smart or good looking or whatever to be loved by people. And that's not how God works. And
yeah.
it's kind of tough to wrap your brain around that as a human, but having a kid kind of just helps open that doorway a little bit. Just kind of gives you a little glimpse of like, oh my goodness, this level of love is different. And it's, like no matter what this kid does, like all they're going to do is spit up and poop for a while, but I couldn't love them anymore. You know what I mean? Like it's a
Yeah,
really eye-opening
absolutely.
experience.
Yeah, and I when you read me that quote the other day, that you wrote down, I've been meditating or thinking about it a lot this week, and the free time that I have, and it'll resonate with you quickly, um, especially if you put your life into perspective. Take a step back and think about all the little ways that you mess up every single day. Um, Accepting God's grace, to me, it leads straight to happiness.
Yeah.
Because
Gratitude and
I have
joy.
I
Yeah.
have that struggle with like I want to do the right thing, and life is about suffering and sacrifice, for God, your family, your country. Like that's what we are. That's what we're supposed to do. But it going through sacrifice something, it's all worth it if you're happy, and that's where the grace. It feels like that's where the grace has been leading me as of recently. Um,
Yeah. And life really, I mean, if I would agree with you if you told me that my purpose on this earth is not for me to have peace of mind. It's not for me to be happy. It's for me to make the lives of the people I love better. Any level of sacrifice required, absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to agree with you. That's my entire perspective. However, coming at that from a baseline level of accepting that, and this is where the hard part comes in, because it's easy to, as a human, think that my ego, my ability and my skills are going to help me accomplish that, right? So the hard part is switching so that there's this underlying baseline of I can only do that fully by the grace of God. Because I'm a human, I'm imperfect, and I'm going to screw it up. It's only through the grace of God that I'm going to be able to accomplish that. It's just a big mindset shift of the
Yeah.
ego being replaced with God.
Yeah. I am a believer of in man and women, like the masculine side, like it is there and it is real.
Yep.
So like denying those things, I don't know if that's quite right, but having a balance of like, hey, I'm never gonna be, I can't, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that you physically is not mentally, physically, emotionally possible to be perfect. Um, it's hard for a male to accept, you know.
Yep.
But I mean, I think this
Admitting.
leads us right into the question of the day perfectly, though.
Yeah.
Which is our question of the day is: what is the best balance between being a tough leader and a nurturing Christian? And I think that this question could be applied to so many different aspects. Um, family. Like I feel it every day in my career as a teacher, working with kids every day, but also in like a business standpoint of with you're working with people beneath you. Well, not beneath you, but you know what I mean. That work for you essentially.
Yeah.
Um, and
That's
you,
a
but
really
you could
good
also do it in
question.
stages of life. I don't know. It's a complex question, but I think it's important for you and for me at the moment because you just had a kid, so.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I guess I've only got what 12 days of experience as a dad so far, so I'll give you more of a synopsis on my life experience entirety up to this point. But the the difference between, I mean, because to lead people through, and this is the way my brain works, so I'm going to assume we're trying to lead people through hard things or to accomplish big things or to get hard things done. You know what I mean? So
or
to
just to be efficient, right?
yeah, to do
In
it
whatever
well.
you're doing.
Yep,
Yes.
to do it well, absolutely, because there's no point in doing something if you're going to do it halfway, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So to do that requires you sometimes you might have to hurt somebody's feelings a little bit. I mean, I haven't really found a way around that. You try to use as much tact as you can in all situations. And the Christian aspect of that is also extremely difficult. Like I think about tough conversations that I may have to have in the future as a Christian all the time. And it's like, okay, Lord, how am I gonna say this in a way that is still showing love or pointing people towards you, essentially. It's like a constant dichotomy between the thing that I want to happen, and I know I could just say XYZ brash words and it would get the job done, but it might not leave that human feeling loved or they may not feel the best way when the job gets done. So you can't just say mission being accomplished is always the only result that matters. So does that make sense? So you kind of
Right.
have to have a priority
Yes.
shift to be able to lead and be an example of God's love. There has to be a priority shift, or you have to have two priorities at that point in time. And that requires you to make different decisions. Like sometimes giving people space to fail and learn is important. I mean, leading an organization, it's important to put boundaries in place so that liability is limited and things like that. But it's also the best way for humans to learn is by doing. And that's, I mean, letting people have a little bit of space where you're not micromanaging them so that they can make mistakes and grow and learn. It's also super important. And then being there in a supportive role is probably the most important aspect of it. That's always the role I tried to take on when we had agents that were coming into problems, or 9 times out of 10 I'd seen the problem before and I knew the solution, and I had already done it myself. But instead of just providing that solution to them, I would just say, okay, well, how can I support you through this? Like, what can I do for, because they're going to come out stronger knowing that they accomplished it, and they're going to be able to accomplish it when if they respect me as their leader in the organization and what I've accomplished, and they see that I'm in their corner helping them no matter what. Sometimes that's all they need to break through the issue on their own. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So essentially, structure um, without constant pressure. Um, where
Yeah.
this question stemmed from was last weekend when we talked about Jocko's podcast, um, and the way he's leading his family and his daughter, like being able to
Yeah.
drop the rock in the middle of the river and have to pick it up and keep going, like unfathomably. Like like this dude is raising tough kids,
Yeah.
like no
Yeah.
question about it. But also, I noticed myself, living with my sister and um, 3 kids, 3 years and under. I find myself, you know, getting annoyed, and then I do more commanding with a harsh tone. And I seen you discipline her in a way that made me stop and reflect for a second. Um, you said, "Okay, this is my second time saying it. I'm not going to say it again," and then you applied the repercussion of what's going to happen. So that's something I've kind of been working on at with those kids, especially younger kids. With
Mm-hmm.
junior high kids, in my day to day, that is where I'm struggling because a lot of these kids are coming from homes that don't even have any sort of a structure, and they don't even know what a structure is.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm not a super structured person in my own life, so it's that balance for me is like I don't know. What I was thinking about this morning was you come off hard, um, and you reflect personally softer, um, but you keep your foundation is built on solid ground.
Yeah. And it's also, too, there's different issues that have different levels of seriousness. You know what I mean? It's like some stuff is a life and death matter. Like, your kid is getting ready to run in the street and cross traffic, that's going to require a swifter, like more resolute solution right then and there. Whereas it's like, oh, the only downside to something that they're trying to do right now is that they might mess it up, or there might be a little bit of a mess that we have to clean up later. Okay, well, then there's much more of an opportunity for them to learn in the latter situation than there is in the first. In the first situation, you have to intervene ASAP, and then there's time for reflection or after action report later, right? The second situation is kind of a learn as you
Yep.
go, and you can be a little more hands off and just say, I'm here if you have questions, or I'm here if you need me, that kind of a deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I've never
Um,
taught junior high, so I don't know what you're dealing with.
yeah. It's like literally like straightforward defiance. Um,
Testing.
yeah, like what can I get away with? And you know, I'm here to help you and to do my best, but I cannot force you to do anything you don't want to do. I can try to inform you, like if you continue down this path, um, it's your life is gonna be affected. If you choose to be lazy and not do what's required of the job, that those qualities carry on and apply forward. It's not even about learning what y equals mx plus b means on the board, dude. It's about doing the work, and if it's
Yeah.
suffering, you suffer through it, and you force yourself to get better at it. And
Yeah.
I've tried to explain this to them a little bit. With me personally, I kind of cheated my way through English all the way through high school and halfway through college with online and with the internet. I mean, you have the
Yeah.
internet.
The
It's the
online
biggest
tools
cheat
only
source in the
improve.
world. Like
Yeah.
Yeah, and now with AI, it's just stupid. But
Yep.
and I'm paying the consequences for it right now with my reading and writing. Like I have to pay $200 a year for Grammarly because I can't my grammar is so poor that I
Yeah.
cannot trust myself to send an email to a parent because it's gonna be missing, and like
Yeah.
comprehending a book that I need to read for a job or a career path that I want to look at. Like I'm paying for it now, and I don't want this to happen to you. But they at that age, it's hard for them to accept that.
Yeah. And that's, I don't, I don't have any profound wisdom for you on that front, except that, I mean, I do know that boundaries matter. Uh, in the leadership position, people have to know that your word is resolute. That it's what you say is what's going to go. So I know that's critical, but I do think that you're the best thing you can do too in some situations is have a little vulnerability, like you have, like you talked about, like sharing that, because that life experience is, we all remember being in school and hearing, you can't just have your calculator with you whenever you want. Well, now we all have a calculator in our pocket 24/7.
Literally
So,
in your back pocket.
so,
Yeah,
it's one thing to come at it from a, like, you have to do it just because I know better. You know, Most kids aren't going to respond to that. But when you come at it from the, dude, this is why, this is my life experience. Like, this is what it's costing me today. And
yeah,
I think that's about the best you can do in some situations.
yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah, I, sometimes it's just hard for me to get that message across, but um, yeah,
Yeah.
it was awesome to get the business side of it down for sure because hopefully that's what we get into eventually. Uh,
Yeah. I'm always down to
but
talk about anything.
yeah, overall, I think we had a pretty solid first episode. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. We'll work in a couple of wisecracks in the next one.
Yeah. All right, you give that baby a big hug for me, will you?
Okay, will do. Love you, bud.
Yep, love you.
Bye.